Joe Biden has unleashed a fresh attack on Donald Trump in the latest ad campaign ahead of the November election. The US president has capitalised on the Republican candidate's trial, labelling him a convicted criminal. Joining me now is former White House Chief of Staff and now Fortno Partners consultant Mick Mulvaney. Mick, great to see you. Perhaps this ad is going against some of the conventional wisdom that it's only boosted Trump among his supporters.
Yeah, LJ, it was fascinating. I saw it this morning on television here for the very first time, and I've seen some really harsh political ads in my day. This is about as aggressive as it gets, at least at the presidential level. Sometimes you'll see really nasty stuff in local and statewide races. But this was a full-on frontal attack by the Biden campaign against Donald Trump, calling him a convicted felon, questioning his character. Everything we sort of talk about on the sidelines blasted in the middle of a 30-second ad. And interestingly, and this, I know this doesn't sound like much outside of the U.S., but this ad is paid for by the Biden campaign itself. Ordinarily in our system, the stuff that I would spend my own money on in my campaign would be to make me look good and wonderful and wholesome. And I would let third parties, outside groups, attack my opponent. That's not what happened here. This is paid and bought by Joe Biden. In our system, at the end of every ad, there has to be a disclaimer who paid for the ad. And this ad says, I'm Joe Biden and I approve this message. My guess is, and it's an educated guess, is that they did this on purpose in order to guarantee that there's a question about Trump's conviction at the upcoming debates at the end of next week.
I think the biggest question is whether Joe Biden is up to it, can actually survive another term. We had this big fundraiser. This is after another G7 meeting where time after time, every public appearance, Joe Biden seems to be disoriented or freeze up. Mick Mulvaney, is this getting a lot of press in the US?
It finally is, and not just inside the right-wing sort of media here. The head bump on the Pope made the headline of a couple major newspapers. I don't know if you saw that in Australia, but he went to go talk to the Pope and actually bumped heads with the Pope as he was bending down to speak to him. That kind of stuff, Laura, is getting more and more attention here. The G7 was a disaster for Joe Biden. The 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion was similarly bad. None of the news coming out of those events, and I've managed a dozen overseas events for the President of the United States, and what you really want coming out of those meetings is high-level stuff where your man or your woman looks very presidential. And that did not look, that was not what came out of the G7 or the D-Day memorials. It was all about his age. So you can absolutely expect to get at least one or two questions about that. Both of them will. Trump just celebrated his 78th birthday over the weekend. Both of them were questions about age. It is front and center in this campaign, the likes of which we've not seen in my lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden and the Democrats have tried to get ahead of this. I know there was another ad that said, you know, where Joe Biden was like, I'm just 3 years older than you. So to remind voters that there's not that big an age gap there. But that doesn't seem to be the problem. It seems to be the cognitive ability, the mental capacity. How can the Democrats let this go on? I mean, at the moment, Mick, it looks like Joe Biden would really struggle to campaign every day in a proper campaign.
He would, and I think what you're seeing them telegraph is he's not going to run an ordinary or a proper campaign. He's going to run sort of a highlight campaign. This has been tried in the past. I think you and I have discussed Jimmy Carter tried this.
I mean, Jimmy Carter from the Rose Garden, yeah.
Yeah,
really?
That's exactly right. You be presidential and you do more set pieces. You do more ribbon cuttings. You give more speeches to groups, and you do set pieces as opposed to sort of glad handing with aspiring voters and so forth. You can try it. They have to try it. Look, there's a lot of discussion here now about whether or not this first debate is timed so that if Biden has a really rough time of it, they can replace him. The Democrats can replace him. All the Democrats I talked to said that's simply not possible, not likely. They don't have a next in line. One of the reasons that Joe Biden is still there at the top of the Democrat Party is he is the easiest person for them to choose. Kamala Harris has her detractors. Gavin Newsom has her detractors. Go down the list. And Joe Biden is sort of the one that everybody is sort of okay with. And if you start to go to the next level, it can create real divisions in the Democrat Party, even more so than you're seeing now.
It's just wild to think that they just cannot come up with an alternative plan here. I mean, if we talk about the proverbial bus, Mick, who would it be?
Well, Kamala Harris. If it's the literal bus,
Well, and
it's gonna be
the
Kamala
Democrats think that would be a disaster, essentially.
They do. She's probably less popular than the president, and for different reasons. She's just not perceived as being competent enough to do the job, even when she is sharp, and she's my age, and she is very sharp. But they just don't.
That.
They don't.
Imagine seeing the commentary around you're not being competent enough compared to Joe Biden. It's a pretty bad
And it's
indictment, isn't it?
It's raising for us something that's never happened, at least in anybody's recent memory, where the vice presidential choices are going to be important. And maybe it's a function of one being 81 and one being 78. But Kamala Harris is absolutely, usually we don't care who the vice presidential person is. What we care about is the thought process that went behind the selecting that person. So if a presidential candidate picks somebody, everybody goes, oh, that's a smart pick. It makes that candidate look good. If they pick somebody that makes everybody scratch their head, and John McCain did this in 2008 with Sarah Palin, the governor of Alaska at the time, people scratch their heads and go, wait a second, I was going to vote for John McCain, but that's a strange choice. This might be different. Ordinarily, it's just sort of a character issue, a judgment issue, but now people might actually care who the vice president is because there's concern on both sides as to whether or not the candidate can last 4 years.
So who's the candidate for Trump? Who's the vice
I still
president?
think the list is not any shorter now than it has been over the last month. Trump has finally said he expects to announce it at the convention at the end of July, towards the end of July. The same 5 or 6 names we've talked about here before: Tim Scott, Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, a bunch of senators, a bunch of governors. I still think Ben Carson, a former cabinet secretary, is at the top of the list. Elise Stefanik, a woman, congresswoman from New York, is on the list. The only name that's really come off the list is Kristi Noem, the very popular, very photogenic governor of South Dakota. She's the one who shot her dog, and that sort of took her off the list.
Right. I remember that. Wild.